We like to believe that the universe has a plan, that somewhere, someone is keeping the chaos in check. It's easier than facing the truth that much of what we call destiny is just cruelty with good marketing. That the divine might not be divine at all, just powerful and bored. And then there are stories that refuses to let us look away. Stories that rips the veil of the sacred order and ask us who we really trust when no one left deserves our faith. In Preacher, power is inherited through violence. Faith is just another form of manipulation, and God himself is the most dangerous character of them all. In this world, belief is never about salvation, it's about control. And when the throne of heaven sits empty, it's not a tragedy, it's a revelation. So let's confront the thing Preacher never let us forget. Chapter 1. Faith as a weapon, not a virtue. Faith is such a convoluted concept. Not because people shouldn't have the right to worship or believe in things, especially religion, but because it can so easily be weaponized. That same faith can be twisted to make people act in extreme or harmful ways, all under the guise of belief. The series becomes a mirror to the very essence of belief. It presents the antithesis of how far we might be willing to go in order to achieve divine knowledge. When faith is misplaced or elevated to the level of blind worship, it begins to unravel. What once was sacred festers into an uncomfortable truth, steeped in despair. Each character in the series carries an agenda, all propelled by a singular devotion to a warped version of faith. There's a striking irony in watching them pose as the righteous, blind to their own sins. Their search for ultimate divine truth leads to a confrontation with faith itself. The divine being meant to resolve their pain and suffering turns out to be just as deceptive and convoluted in the message he sent to his creation. The irony is blatant. Faith becomes a weapon in the hands of those who cares more about self-interest than a true moral compass. They justify their actions as being for the greater good, pretending to hold a higher moral ground, yet their motives are rooted in selfishness and arrogance. From Jesse's bond with Genesis, granting him godlike power to control others and even challenge God himself, to the Grail, an organization manipulating apocalyptic outcomes and deciding who is worthy of heaven or hell. The abuse of power is deeply entrenched. These institutions wield violence, erase history, silence miracles, and eliminate oppositions, all under the pretense of a divine mission. They believe themselves to be superior, even as their sense of morality becomes increasingly distorted. Faith in their hands is no longer about belief or salvation. It becomes a tool for survival, a weaponized path towards a desired end. And in that pursuit, the integrity of faith, its moral foundation, is entirely undone. Chapter 2. Violence as Exorcism. Violence and being religious have long been source of conflicts, dividing nations, collapsing civilizations. The irony is that violence and religion should never have belonged in the same conversation. Twisted interpretations have allowed both to coexist, leading to the belief that one god is superior to another, fueling conflicts that never needed to exist in the first place. That is the mirror Preacher forces us to look into, a supposedly clean moral order, embraced by those who believe salvation will arrive once they let Christ into their hearts. But as the series unfolds, what initially appears to be a religious narrative quickly devolves. By the middle of the first episode, it becomes clear that violence might be the only way forward. Not because religion and violence are inherently incompatible, but because the rules were written long ago by those above, rules that normalized suffering and violence as acts of devotion. This twisted form of control is masked at first when Jesse Custer preaches salvation in a small Texas town. But everything begins to unravel when he discovers that God has abandoned his post. Every sermon he delivered, every word spoken in God's name has been based on a lie. The violence Jesse begins to wield isn't a moral failing or an accident. It's something inherited, something embedded deep within him. And when Jesse starts searching for God, that pursuit becomes catastrophic. The entire town is wiped out, erased by methane explosion. The destruction isn't random. It's reflecting a disturbing truth. From Jesse's realization to the annihilation of his community, it's all something God seems to take pleasure in. That same violence is what the Grail represents, an organization that operates as the liaison between heaven, hell, and earth. The Grail commits atrocities in the name of God, both overt and covert, from assassinating rival zealots to suppressing any public signs of divine miracles. Their actions are justified by their belief in divine purpose, no matter how brutal their methods are. Violence, it seems, is encoded in the fabric of creation. It cannot be exercised because it was always meant to be there. Some individuals are born into it, drawn to it. The saint of killers, Jesse himself, all part of a divine design, not in spite of God, but because of him. Chapter 3. Power without purpose, when creation becomes cruelty. The journey faced by each and every character and its endgame leading to one truth: whether powerful or ordinary, all lives are equally miserable. The path is predetermined, written for the entertainment of the almighty creator and his cronies. As a result, every life is rendered meaningless, or worse, tragic. Even when characters gain near godlike powers like Jesse or transforms into vampires, there is no satisfaction. Those moments of power becomes just another trap they fall into. No journey is perfect. Each is merely another chapter in an endless procession of misery. Purpose itself becomes hollow, just another illusion meant to justify suffering. That's the cruel irony. No one is allowed happiness, because that was never the goal. The world is an endless void, shaped by beings who saw worship and suffering as the only true answer. Religion becomes the invasive tool for control, infiltrating the very fabric of creation. Humanity, its meaning, and its existence are micromanaged, like property. Everyone, regardless of power, is a pawn in a game so intricately constructed that even those with the strength cannot recognize the trap they're in. The deepest irony is that the system, built to be unbreakable, can be exploited. When the right power emerges, it can manipulate the same tools of control that the so-called gods once used. This supposed invulnerability becomes the ultimate curse, dragging all beings, mortal and divine, towards suffering. In the end, even God is not immune. Believing himself untouchable, he too is undone. And so, for every life, ethereal, human, or otherwise, existence is stripped of meaning. That meaning is dictated by an authority that never understood freedom to begin with. Chapter 4. God's entitlement versus human suffering. The most dangerous people out there in the world are those who are blinded by a single belief, one so consuming that it overrides any moral boundaries. They convince themselves that simply declaring this is for the cause makes anything justified, even violence and tragedy. That same danger applies to those who worship the celestial order, whether it be God, Satan, or anything in between. Even if the masses understand the difference between worship and action, once someone accepts that pleasing a higher power in any actionable form makes any action permissible, they become capable of justifying even the worst atrocities. Take Grandma, for instance. She strikes a deal with Satan to live forever, offering up the necessary souls for hell in return. Or consider the Grail, who plays both sides of the divine spectrum, enacting a plan to have a descendant of Jesus brainwash the masses into a total compliance. And those who resist, they're doomed to die instantly. These are the acts that God enjoys in the series, the willingness to push humanity to its limits under the guise of divine providence. He positions himself as the hero, claiming to care for humankind while allowing or even encouraging suffering as part of his grand design. And God enjoys this. He moves with entitlement, confident that no one will challenge him because of blind devotion. People pray, praise, and obey, reinforcing his authority and feeding the illusion of untouchability. The entitlement in his armor, built since the dawn of creation. As long as human suffering and pleasure exist on a tiny scale he controls, he remains the puppeteer. And when he decides that the current chapter of humanity is over, he resets the board, starts fresh, and creates a new batch of loyal followers to worship him. That is the cycle God has built, a system where the balance of human suffering becomes its most dangerous weapon. Chapter 5. The Absentee God, Authority Without Accountability. When God decides to leave his post as authority figure, there is a sense of anarchy in every corner of the world. The humans worshipping him had begun to hear nothing from the heavens, while agents of hell became more ruthless and roguish in their actions to take more piece of the cake in being evil. And yet, God didn't care. There was no accountability because God knew from the start that when he had left, something similar to the event of the series would transpire. Some would begin to search for him, using any resources and powers they had at their disposal. Others would embrace the anarchy, doing things that would normally never be accepted in the natural order. This becomes the reason why there needs to be a savior, a replacer for the natural order. And while there are many contenders, some, especially from hell, wanted the chaos to continue. Others, like the Saint of Killers, needed the order to be set right, hoping that maybe he could be worthy of redemption in the eyes of that order, to be reunited with his family once again. Then, there were those who believed that replacing God himself was the only suggestion. When the Pope announced that God had left his position, the human race went into a panic. The Grail, having contingencies, chose options they believed could lead humanity forward. Using violence and compliance, they attempted to make Genesis and its host, Jesse Custer, into someone valid. Others thought the descendant of Jesus, Humperdinck, would be the best candidate. There was no authority, and because of what God had started, a floodgate of different opinions opened with no one agreeing on anything. With that came zero accountability, and God, from the background, just watched, knowing how this would unfold. He used it as an excuse. The time for the human race was over. He then enacted the Grail to start a protocol to eliminate the entirety of the human race. That journey is what Jesse and his gang of friends stumbled upon, an endless nonsense on both sides of violence. Eventually, the only figure that would get out on top would be the one with the most power. Chapter 6, the ending. If no one deserves the throne, should it stay empty? The question that Preacher forces us to confront isn't about faith versus anarchy. It's not even centered around the power Jesse received in the first episode. Instead, it's a story about the title, about the throne in heaven, the one meant to be the seat that kept balance in world order, both on Earth and across the celestial barrier. We can understand why God left. It's almost easy to accept. But once we truly learn who God is, deep down, we see a figure who can dictate anything he wishes into existence, even the apocalypse. A figure who will betray anyone, even the loyal and the faithful. Someone who doesn't understand what it means to be human, only the pleasure of being one. Someone who believes suffering is necessary, yet never have the courage to face real suffering himself. That was the being who controlled the throne of the celestial order. And when he heard the first bad news in eons, he left. He abandoned his post, causing havoc and preparing the world for an apocalypse where everyone would die. And when someone like that holds their fingers on the nuclear button we call life, even the most faithful will one day awaken and realize what kind of tyrannical maniac they've been serving all along. But we can also admit that no character in the series is fit to take the throne either. No one escapes sin. Every major character in Preacher is touched by it. And that's the bitter irony. God crafted a final symphony and invited the worst of the worst to be its players. Even though the series presents two opposing sides, one bent on starting an apocalypse and the other determined to stop it, there's a deeper, more pointed message. Neither side is worthy of the seat. Not Jesse, not Cassidy, not Tulip, not Hairstar, and certainly not the Saint of Killers. That's the tragic irony God left behind. Preacher isn't just about religion. It renders being uncomfortable with religion almost pointless. With all its violence and its even more extreme violence, masked under dark humor, tragedy, and spiritual symbolism, nothing about it is laughable. It transforms into an existential crisis, a mirror that forces us to reflect on our own lives. Are we too headed down on the same road? The path where belief, no matter how small its origins, can consume us completely? And sadly, who's to say whether there is or isn't a divine figure still atop the throne? The truth is, the world has become so consumed by its own beliefs that we may already be standing at the same senseless place Preacher foreshadowed, if not already past the tipping point. And maybe that's the point Preacher leaves us with. When no one is fit to rule and the divine throne sits empty, maybe it's a reflection of our own world more than we'd like to admit.